Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 tier list. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're continuing with part 3 of my fun tier list, where I go through and rate every class and subclass based on how fun I think it is. I'm recording this before posting parts 1 or part 2, so I haven't read any of the feedback or seen any of the feedback or reaction to those yet. So I just want to emphasize again as we go through this, as I mentioned in parts 1 and part 2, it's important to keep in mind that this is an extremely subjective exercise. This is how fun I think these things are. And if you enjoy different things or think that some of the classes that I don't think are super fun are really fun, awesome. That's really good. The best thing about D&D or Baldur's Gate 3 is that there's a myriad of different playstyles, and the core mechanics of the game are so fun that whatever lens you use to experience those mechanics and whatever goal you have that you're trying to accomplish in order to have more fun, that is available to you, and I think that that is amazing. If anyone ever tries to tell you that there's only one way to play a game or that what you are enjoying isn't fun, that is, as I said last time, a sign that they are at best not intellectually rigorous, and you shouldn't pay attention to their opinion. And if I think that something isn't fun and you think it is fun, I would love to hear about it. Let me know, because if there are fun ways to play characters that I hadn't considered, or if I've missed something fun about a class, then I absolutely want to know about that, both because I'm just excited that people are having fun in different ways. I think that's cool, and also because if there's something I've missed that I would enjoy, then I definitely want to try it. So let's use this as a jumping off point to talk about the cool, fun things about the characters that we enjoy most, and without any further ado, let's get into it and start rating the classes. We'll start with rogues. So rogue is a much maligned class from an optimization perspective, because when considered over the course of the 12 levels, rogue is almost certainly the weakest of the 12 classes as a monoclass character. This is because a lot of rogue's power is front-loaded into the first 3 levels of the class, and it's really its subclasses that get the mechanical power of the character. So you'll often hear people say that rogue is the weakest class in terms of mechanics, myself included. That has almost nothing to do with how fun it is, though, and I think that Rogue kind of knocks it out of the park in terms of being a class that is fun to play in actual practice. That's because Rogue has 2 things that are really awesome. One is moments of high drama, because whether or not you land your sneak attack really can change the course of a fight, since it's so much damage and you only get 1 per turn. And I'll talk about the only 1 per turn thing a little bit more in a second. And also, it gets tactical positioning that it can do basically as well or better than any other class. Like Monk, Rogue has a mobile, elusive playstyle of dashing in and out of combat, bonus action hiding, running back and forth to get your one big hit and then get out of danger, and because you can always bonus action, dash, disengage, or hide, there's a lot of decisions that you have to make on your turn as to how you're going to use those abilities. Rogue is also one of the most flexible classes in terms of multiclassing, because you can combine it with just about any other class in order to create really interesting characters, because it gives you so much utility. You have expertise in a bunch of skills. You can build it for just about any out-of-combat purpose as well as in-combat purpose, and it combines really well with other classes as a result for a really satisfying character to build. The downsides of Rogue are that the power level is relatively low, so if you're looking for a class that just puts up huge numbers, then Rogue is at least past level 3 in certain multi-classes, not where you want to be. And if you get frustrated with missing attacks in important moments, Rogue is definitely not the class for you. Because Rogue only gets 1 attack per round, it matters so much whether or not you land that attack, because your sneak attack is so critical, and you don't have extra attack. There's ways to mitigate this with offhand attacks and stuff, but just bear with me. The way that Rogue plays out in practice means that sometimes you'll miss a key attack, and then your Rogue will feel like they aren't doing anything for the entire turn cycle. This is more pronounced in Tabletop than in Baldur's Gate 3, because if you miss an attack in Tabletop, and Rogues are a martial class, the thing they do is attack, so when you miss, you feel like you're not accomplishing anything. In a Tabletop game, it can be half an hour before your turn comes around again, and that's if you're party is keeping up like pace of play and everything, and nobody gets a phone call or whatever. In Baldur's Gate, either you're playing solo, so it doesn't really matter whether one character is standing idle for a bit, or you're playing co-op, but turns are probably more like 5 minutes for the full turn cycle rather than half an hour, so you're not waiting as long if you happen to miss an attack. Still, the punishing feeling of missing an attack and not getting to do anything with your turn is real, and that's a real emotional downside of Rogue, and the fact that even when things go perfectly, with a monoclass Rogue, you won't be as effective in terms of pure damage output as other classes is definitely a downside as well. Rogue is also a core component of a bunch of really broken builds that, in my opinion, make the game a little bit less fun to play, although the fact that they are based on Rogue makes those builds more fun to play inherently, just because Rogue's first 3 levels get some of the most fun abilities in the game. Specifically, their level 2 abilities are just awesome and really fun to use, and so that helps mitigate some of the play pattern downsides of those characters because it makes them more mobile and more dynamic and more interesting to actually play. So I think at core, Rogue, in terms of the amount of fun that it is to play, is a class that really brings it, and while it is on the lower end of the spectrum power-wise, that doesn't matter in terms of how fun it is. Arcane Tricksters. So Arcane Trickster is similar to Eldritch Knight in that it is meant to be a hybrid spellcaster and martial character, but really doesn't do the spellcasting part, or at least up until level 9, when you get access to the disadvantage. I think that Arcane Trickster doesn't quite fit into the niche that it's intended to in terms of its design, because the spellcasting portion of the class just doesn't quite match up to the other things that the class is doing, and so it really ends up being similar to Eldritch Knight about having shield and utility spells on an otherwise totally martial character. At level 9, you do get to start using Hold Person with the disadvantage on saving throws from hiding, and I think that's pretty cool, but I think that Arcane Trickster doesn't quite get there on its design goals of being a hybrid rogue and spellcasting class. One way to mitigate this, I think, would be to bring it back to its roots in 3rd edition, where its niche was sneak attacking with ray spells, because in 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons, there was no restriction that a sneak attack had to be with a martial weapon. With a weapon attack, and so you could sneak attack on spells and so on, and Arcane Trickster let you get both sneak attack dice and spells to fire, so that was just a cool niche for a character to have. It doesn't get that niche in 5th edition, so it doesn't quite fill the fantasy of being the stealthy spellcaster that I would like, and bards mostly do that just better in actual practice. Being the sneaky spellcaster as a bard or a warlock works better than as an arcane trickster. That being said, Arcane Trickster is still just a really fun character to play because it's just doing the things that rogues do, which are already fun, and it does them very reliably, and it's extremely difficult to kill. Arcane Trickster is one of the most elusive and safest characters in the game to play, and so if you're looking for a character that is very hard to lose with, Arcane Trickster is actually great, because having shield, having the bonus action dashes and disengages and whatever, having the ability to hide in combat means that you will always be able to be evasive, dash in and out of combat, and stab things, and I think from that perspective it fills its role pretty well. I'm going to rate it A tier because I think that in play it's really fun, but I do always wish that it did the thing it was trying to do a little bit better. And so I think that A tier is pretty fair because it's going to be a really fun character to play. It will always be an enjoyable time, but the power level of the spellcasting is just not quite high enough to make it an attractive option to actually use in play for most of the game, and I do think that that is a shame. Overall, still just a really fun character, A tier. Assassin. So Assassin Rogue gets to do critical hits and take multiple actions at the start of combat if they start from stealth, and that's really fun. I mean, just being able to start combats with massive critical hit damage is great, and you wouldn't play an Assassin Rogue if you didn't want to do that, right? Like, it does the thing that it says it is going to do in the title, and it does it really well. The downside of Assassin Rogue in Baldur's Gate 3 is less the specific mechanics of the class, although I will say the fact that it gets no abilities after level 3 is not my favorite. Like, Assassin Rogue has almost no additional abilities after level 3, but obviously you can mitigate that by using it as part of a multi-class. But the real downside of Assassin Rogue in Baldur's Gate 3 is just bugs. The game will sometimes not mark enemies as surprised, even though you surprised them. The game will sometimes not count your initial round as the first round of combat for your advantage or for your critical hits. The game will sometimes not roll you into initiative, even if you try to join an encounter. And those bugs are frustrating to play with. I try not to mark these characters, these classes down too much because of bugs, because they have mostly done a decent job of addressing them. But I think that the bugs with Assassin Rogue are so core to how the character works that it is going to be very difficult to root them out if that's something they're even that interested in doing. Over the course of a long playthrough with an assassin, you're going to lose a lot of criticals that you should have gotten. You're going to lose a lot of sneak attacks that you should have gotten because the game decides it was like wasn't a new round when it was a new round or something like that. And you're also going to get a lot of random free attacks because the game decides not to roll you into combat even though you have struck an enemy. And because of the way that Assassin Rogue interrupts the combat starting code, I think that sometimes causes it to just not join combat properly until you get an extra turn after that. So there's a bunch of like weird things that don't work with Assassin Rogue. They've mostly fixed the thing where it wouldn't give you your actions back at the start of combat, but not entirely. Sometimes you just won't get your actions in the first round of combat. And I find all of those quite frustrating. The core gameplay, though, of Assassin Rogue is so much fun, and I don't want to just talk about bugs for the entire time, because just deleting an enemy off the start is awesome, and it's lends itself to a bunch of really creative and cool builds. Because the critical hits work with anything, it doesn't have to be a dagger strike or an arrow that you use with your Assassin Rogue. You can sneak up behind an enemy and whack them with a two-handed smite with a paladin. I did a build for that. You can blast them with a lightning blast with a witch bolt. I did a build for that. And those are also really cool and interesting things that you can do with Assassin Rogue, and it has all of the cool and fun things that rogues already do. I do think that the bugs inherent in playing Assassin Rogue, and the fact that it is sort of a one-trick pony in general, I mean, it's going to do a big critical hit at the start of combat, and that's the thing that it does, and it has no other abilities as a class, do hold this class back a little bit, but overall it's so good at doing the thing that it's supposed to do, and if you're playing this character, then that's the thing that you want. I'm going to rate it A tier, if only because of the bugs. If those didn't exist, it would be an S tier. Thief Rogue. So Thief Rogue is part of some of the most broken builds in the game, and given what I've talked about sort of broken builds, you might expect me to count that fairly heavily against Thief Rogue, but I'm not going to, because the real culprits in most of those builds are attacking with bonus actions and Tavern Brawler. The monk builds that use Thief or the Berserker builds that use Thief, the real problems with those builds are that Tavern Brawler is broken, not that Thief Rogue is broken. Now, Thief Rogue is super powerful. An extra bonus action is probably too much for a class to give you at 3rd level. I think that is over power curve and gives you just like too many attacks with offhand weapons, with monk flurries, with anything that lets you attack with your bonus action. Dungeons & Dragons should generally be very careful with damaging bonus actions, and 5th edition, I think 5th edition should probably be more careful with damaging bonus actions. 5th edition in general wasn't that careful with it, and Baldur's Gate is even less careful with it, as well as making bonus actions way more powerful by giving you the bonus action jumps and pushes and stuff. But all of those things are just so fun to do that I don't think that it matters that it's a little bit over power curve. Thief Rogue is part of some of the most interesting and creative builds in the game, and there's all kinds of stuff you can do with it that isn't the same Monk Thief or Berserker Thief builds over and over again. You can build it as part of casting builds. You can build it as to get multiple dashes for extra mobility on tank barbarians. You can build it just to give you additional utility on any character, and I think that is really cool. So even though Thief Rogue is, again, a class that more or less only has 3 levels, and is a little bit over power curve. I think it's just so much fun to play in general and enables so many cool and creative things that I'm going to go ahead and place it in S tier. I think it is very close to S plus tier and would reach S plus tier if it had like just a couple more abilities later on in the class levels, because the third level ability is awesome, and as someone who likes doing cool and creative builds, is one of the ones that I really like building around, because it's just so cool and so powerful and so unique. And while it is, I think, over power curve, I don't think it's so over power curve that the Thief Rogue class should be heavily penalized for that in terms of fun. So many things that you can do are really fun when you're playing a Thief Rogue, and I highly recommend building it in as many different ways as possible, because there's a million that are really awesome. The only thing I think that holds this class back is just that the rest of the class doesn't do that much, and so you're using it just for the third level feature, but that's just kind of a problem with rogues in general, but as a part of a multi-class is just an awesome thing to build with, so S tier. Sorcerers. So Sorcerer is a class all about breaking the action economy, and breaking the action economy is fun. I mean, that's one of the things that we are here to do, is break parity on the action economy and just get to style on our opponents by taking lots and lots of turns. Unfortunately, Sorcerer's a little too good at this, because breaking the action economy is such a powerful thing to do that, unlike, say, Thief Rogue, who gets an extra bonus action, Sorcerer basically gets 3 turns for the price of 1 as long as you have sorcery points left. Between twinning and quickening and the fact that there are none of the restrictions that on those spells that exist in Tabletop have been translated to Baldur's Gate 3. In Tabletop, for example, you cannot quicken a leveled spell and then cast a second leveled spell in the same turn. But in Baldur's Gate 3, you can throw out 2 fireballs in a turn if you want, no problem. And you can twin spells and whatever as much as you want. Many spells that can't be twinned in Tabletop can in Baldur's Gate and so on, although they've nerfed some of those. Without those restrictions, Sorcerer just gets to take 3 turns for the price of 1, and that is just too many turns in terms of balance. For that reason, Sorcerer tends to be just a little bit over power curve for my taste, just because it's going to one-shot a lot of encounters before the enemies get to go. If you are casting 4 Chain Lightnings on the opening round of combat, it doesn't matter what encounter you're facing, it's going to be dead before it gets a turn, and so you'll never actually experience the combat. And so Sorcerers tend to be just a little bit over power curve for my taste in actual play, because of how powerful Quicken and Twinning Spell is. Now again, you don't have to use these options, and I think that Sorcerer's inherent gameplay also is just so fun, and much like Swordsbard, the way that Sorcerer is broken is a really fun way to be broken. Like, it does a really powerful thing, but that really powerful thing is also really fun to do. So I'm not going to count that too heavily against Sorcerer, but it is worth mentioning that the class does come with some balance issues. Draconic Sorcerer. So Draconic Sorcerer is really cool thematically. It's a class that I really like from a theming standpoint, and I really like that you get like the dragon scales on your character's model visually. I think that's really cool. Similar to Wildheart Barbarian and the piercings, I think the fact that your class actually affects your character's appearance is really neat. Very well implemented in that from that perspective. But what the class does give you is all small numerical bonuses, or in some cases quite large numerical bonuses. You get more armor class, you get more hit points, you get more damage, and eventually you get the ability to fly, which is very cool. Just constant passive flight is really fun and makes a great capstone ability, because in Baldur's Gate it's not that powerful, but it is thematic and awesome, and so getting it late means that it has already, well, by the time you get it, it's already past the point where it would be broken, but it is really fun and satisfying to do. Flying around everywhere is really cool, and having that be your capstone ability, I think, is great from a fun standpoint, even if it's not quite as powerful from an optimization standpoint. And so that ability is really cool, but the rest of the abilities are just kind of numerical bonuses that improve your damage or give you elemental resistance or whatever. Not in and of themselves that exciting. You can make really exciting builds out of Draconic Sorcerer, either by multiclassing it, by getting spell access, And Sorcerer just gives you a lot of options as a multi-class character as well. Or by focusing in on the damage from the elemental damage with the like magic missile builds that use lightning charges, or the scorching ray builds do massive burst damage, and that is quite fun. But overall, Draconic Sorcerer is going to be mostly focused on doing a ton of damage as quickly as possible, and what it mostly gets is numerical bonuses. So while I do like Sorcerers, I think that Draconic Sorcerer is, to me, the least appealing of the Sorcerers, just because it is... it doesn't do anything that Sorcerer as a base class doesn't do, and so I'm going to rate it A tier because it is fun and powerful and flexible, but what it mostly gets is numerical bonuses that just improve your effectiveness as a character rather than new options, and I'm much more interested in things that give me new options as someone who's making builds or playing a character all the way through. Overall, it's going to be a great time, and if you want to do a lot of damage with a Sorcerer, then Draconic Sorcerer is the way to go, because it is so cool and so good at doing that. And I will say that the level 10 flight ability is awesome, and is one of the most fun and flavorful abilities in the game, and definitely worth the 10 levels to get there. And unlike with like Hunter Ranger, it doesn't just break the game when you reach that point. It becomes it's fun to use and really cool, but even though you spent 10 levels trying to get to it, it doesn't just totally overpower every encounter from then on, or anything along those lines. Level 11 flight, excuse me. So I think that is a great design, the passive flight that they get, but other than that, the class just doesn't have that much that's that exciting. Storm Sorcerer. So Storm Sorcerer, like Draconic Sorcerer, is also broken. They do just too much to take too many turns, just like all Sorcerers. But I think that the balance issues are kind of the only thing that's holding this class back, because right from level 1, you get one of the most fun and tactical and interesting abilities in the game. Tempestuous Magic, letting you fly as a bonus action after you cast a spell, means that when you cast a spell in combat becomes a mini game of where you need to position, and whether you need the Tempestuous Magic that turn, or whether you'll need it to escape in a future turn, and so on. And that is a really cool dynamic that adds a lot of decision making to your encounters right from the beginning of the game. It's very powerful, and again, a little over power curve, Tempestuous Magic, but it's so cool to use that I don't think it matters that much that it's over power curve. And Storm Sorcerer's other abilities are all pretty fun as well. The extra AoE damage that sort of passively damages things around enemies is just quite satisfying. Even though it's only a small numerical bonus, it just feels good to do, and the visuals are really cool. And the extra spells are really nice as well, giving you just a few more options. One thing that Sorcerers can often feel like is that they don't have any options because they get so few spells, and Storm Sorcerer just gets more spells known, which helps a lot with that. Just even the 5 extra spells known that you get is a big difference in terms of whether you'll have an answer in a specific encounter, or whether you'll have an interesting decision to make on a given turn. And so I think that Storm Sorcerer does an excellent job of filling the power fantasy of the Sorcerer role, in a way that's cool and unique and makes you make a lot of decisions. That said, it's too powerful. Again, just like every Sorcerer, it's a little bit over power curve, so I'm going to go ahead and rate it S tier. I think that you will always have interesting things to do, but I think those interesting things will in the early game, but I think in the mid game those interesting things get less and less interesting just as Sorcerer becomes too powerful for the game, and the natural play pattern becomes spamming out double hastes or spamming out quadruple chain lightnings or whatever in the late game. Overall, still, though, just an extremely satisfying, thematic, and fun character to play, and I definitely recommend it, especially if you're looking for just a very powerful character. I think if you are also, if you want to play a spellcaster, and if you're interested in playing a spellcaster and you're relatively new to Baldur's Gate, Storm Sorcerer is the class that I would recommend the most. It's one of the most fun classes in the game to play. It won't overwhelm you with options, but you'll always have something fun to do, and there's a lot to discover with how Tempestuous Magic works in terms of positioning and mobility and utility that I think is really cool. Overall, just a great class to play, and really powerful and fun all the way through the game, but maybe just a little bit too powerful. S tier. Wild Magic Sorcerer. So, much like Wild Magic Barbarian, this class is random. And so if you don't like randomness, if you find it frustrating to roll a die and lose an encounter as a result, this is not the class for you. That doesn't bother me. In fact, I love that type of thing. If I can have an auto mode and run end in a hilarious way because I summoned a Cambion on the starting beach or whatever, that I enjoy that a lot. And in the mid game, I think that Wild Magic Sorcerer is one of the classes that provides the most interesting tactical situations in the game. Like other sorcerers, it's broken. It's too powerful for the game, but it has a tremendous and real drawback to push back against that power. And because it is, unlike Wild Magic Barbarian, it's hard to mitigate all the downsides of Wild Magic Sorcerer. Some of the downsides are genuinely bad for you throughout the entire game. You will often face adverse situations as a result of using Wild Magic. I think that for that reason, Wild Magic is one of the coolest designs and most interesting characters in the game if you don't get frustrated by RNG. And if you do get frustrated by RNG, this is not the class for you, and it's totally okay to get frustrated by RNG. I absolutely get it. But if you are someone who really likes to be presented with varied situations as a result of randomness, Wild Magic Sorcerer does that super well, and often you can recover. There will be times when you just cannot recover from a bad roll on the Wild Magic table, but because you are playing a sorcerer and so have some of the most powerful tools in the game, you can often recover even from the worst possible rolls on the Wild Magic table, and for me that's very satisfying. Playing through the game with the risk of failure, but also the joy of success is what gives me joy in this game. And so having the constant risk of failure applied every time I cast a spell, deciding whether or not I'm going to use a spell and risk rolling badly on the table, or whether it will be easier to try to win a combat without activating that chance is really fun for me. I find that very tactical, and because it presents you with novel situations throughout the game, I feel like you have to change your playstyle throughout the entire game with Wild Magic Sorcerer. And so the fact that it has these huge upsides because it's a sorcerer and huge downsides because of the randomness makes Wild Magic Sorcerer for me one of the most fun playthroughs in the game, with the caveat again that if you are someone who does not enjoy randomness, this is obviously not the class for you. And if you're looking for the most powerful or optimized playstyle, this is not the class for you because the enemy of optimization is randomness. And so when you're trying to optimize your characters, you try to avoid randomness as much as possible, which means not playing Wild Magic. But if you are looking to have a hilarious time or just have a bad beat story to tell your friends about the time that your whole party got turned into sheep and you fell into lava or whatever, then Wild Magic Sorcerer is absolutely the class for you, and that's in my own casual play, that's what I'm here for, so S+ tiered for sure for me. Warlock. So Warlock is, in my opinion, one of the best themed characters in the game. It's an incredibly cool and thematic character. I think that most people have a little bit of the edgy teen in them who just really wants to listen to metal music and summon demons, and Warlock does a great job of capturing that feeling. I will say that compared to the Paladin Oaths, or the cleric deities and stuff like that, the Warlock pacts have had a lot less love put into them in this game than the other sort of class-specific features like that, and I wish they had a little bit more. If you could interact with your patron in some way, that would be pretty cool. Obviously, Will gets his own storyline about it, but for other Warlock characters, or if it just came up a little bit more often in dialogue, then that would be something that I would personally really enjoy, just making it feel like more a part of the character. But honestly, I can't criticize Baldur's Gate for that. They've done such a great job of integrating that kind of backstory decision into the dialogue, something which is incredibly difficult to do, that I'm really just asking for more than I need here when talking about the Warlock pacts. Warlock does, from a mechanical standpoint, have a design issue that it kind of has to overcome, though, when you're talking about being fun in actual play, and that's just how the spell slots work. Warlocks always have their all Warlock resources are the same. Every Warlock spell is the same value, and all Warlocks always have their best spells available. So in order to make a meaningful decision in combat, you need to design a class such that the right answer isn't just always cast your best spell, because it costs you exactly the same as casting every other spell. For the most part, the design of the Warlock spell list and how it's implemented does not really accomplish that, and Warlocks will often spend combats just casting the same spell over and over again, and then using Eldritch Blast for the rest of combat. So a lot of combats you're going to end up doing either Darkness or Hunger of Hadar, and then Eldritch Blasting for the remaining turns of the combat while you concentrate on those spells. So sometimes there just aren't meaningful decisions to make with Warlock, because why would you use a different spell when you have the best spell? That being said, you can build your Warlock in ways where there's lots of meaningful decisions, and especially Blade Locks have access to a lot of positioning-based decision-making and interesting things that they're doing in terms of trying to kite the enemies in and out of their darkness clouds and so on that make Warlock pretty fun to play. Trying to pull enemies into a group so you can hit them with a big Hunger of Hadar or whatever is also really fun, but I do think that Warlocks in actual combat tend to play out the same combat after combat after combat. And to me, that gets old eventually, where you are just using the same spell and same set of actions over and over again. That being said, it's a really fun playstyle. Just dropping Hunger of Hadar on enemies and then Eldritch Blasting them to death feels very satisfying. So it's not like the thing that you're doing isn't cool. It's just that the thing you're doing is going to be the same. And the other issue that Warlocks have is that their Eldritch Invocations, which should be a source of meaningful decision-making during the builds, are very imbalanced. It's similar to Battlemaster maneuvers, where there's some that are just way better than others, and so Warlock builds will tend to all look the same, where if you aren't taking Devil Sight and Agonizing Blast, you are just hurting your Warlock. Those are just better than all the other Eldritch Invocations, and even melee-focused Warlocks are going to take those and Repelling Blast like most of the time, so there just isn't a lot of meaningful decision-making with one of the character's core features as you level it up, and some of the spells are so much better than others that there is, I feel like, fewer meaningful decisions to make in that sense. That said, what you get for that is a thematic and powerful and really cool character that also doesn't have to long rest, which is cool in and of itself. It's a charisma character also, which gives it some bonuses as well in my book, because passing dialogue checks is fun, and conversing is just fun. So I'm certainly not going to say that Warlocks are not fun, just that there is an inherent challenge to Warlocks, that you want to add some decision making with the subclasses to the class to make up for some of the decision making that doesn't quite exist with the base class mechanics. Archfey Warlocks. So Archfey gets overlooked a lot, I think, but I think Archfey Warlocks are actually really cool and interesting, and more powerful than people think they are. The AoE fear at early levels is both cool and fun to use. Because it is a 10-foot radius around you, it requires that your squishy ranged character put themselves in a group of enemies, and you're going to be squishy even if you end up building a blade lock with your Archfey Warlock. And that is a cool dynamic. You can either use it defensively or offensively, and deciding how to maximize that is a really fun way to play a character. And Misty Escape that you get at level 6, I think, is also really cool. When you take damage, you become invisible and you can Misty Step away. Not only is that very thematic, I think it is also just really fun to use and something that is particularly interesting. Your expanded spell list doesn't add that many dynamics, although having plant growth on a Warlock can be really cool. Trapping enemies in Hunger of Hadar with plant growth is a cool strategy, although again it falls into the problem of just casting the same spells over and over again in combat. But in general, I think that Archfey adds some meaningful decisions to Warlock's play pattern, especially in the early game, where you're deciding when and how to use your Fey presence, and that makes them really fun to play, in my opinion. The charm effective Fey presence doesn't do anything, so it's not really worth considering. I do think that the way they implemented charm in Baldur's Gate maybe could use a rework. I would like for it to work a little more like it does in Tabletop, where you could like convince enemies to do stuff for you in some way, but I don't really have any vision for how you would implement that. So that, that's just me expressing a vague unsatisfaction with the mechanic as it currently is, not having a solution to the problem. Um, but overall, I think that Archfey Warlock just does a bunch of cool stuff, is mechanically interesting. Yes, you're going to play like a Warlock where you are just Hunger Fadaring and Eldritch Blasting for most turns of combat, but that is a very satisfying way to play, and Archfey adds a couple extra layers of decision making to the character, so I'm going to place it in S tier because I think it's just fun and satisfying all the way through the game, even if you'll mostly be doing the same things for most of the game. The playstyle is fun enough that it's just worth doing those things. Fiend Warlock. So Fiend Warlock gets the on kill you gain temporary hit points, which is thematically so awesome. Unfortunately, it does conflict a little bit with one of Warlock's core spells, Armor of Agathis. While it doesn't replace the Armor of Agathis, and indeed can work to refill it in some circumstances, temporary hit points don't stack with one another, and so gaining temporary hit points from Dark One's Blessing sometimes conflicts with having Armor of Agathis up. That's a little bit of internal tension to the character that doesn't necessarily count against it, but does exist. And the other thing that Fiend Warlocks get is just a great expanded spell list. You get a bunch of damage spells, you get command, and all of those can be really interesting. Having Wall of Fire and having command makes you have a lot more options on your Warlock than just Hunger Vidar over and over again. And so that is something that Fiend Warlocks get that some of the other Warlocks don't get, is meaningful spell decisions between casting different spells in combat. That being said, I think that Dark One's Blessing, while it seems really cool, is not that satisfying to use. Command is similar to Stunning Strike, just not an incredible design in Baldur's Gate 3 because it's just binary. Either it works and you don't play the encounter, or it doesn't work and you've wasted your turn. And so both of those things count a little bit against Fiend Warlock in my books. I think that it is just still very fun to play the way that every Warlock character is. The core Warlock playstyle is great, and Fiend Warlock draining hit points from enemies is satisfying and feels good, but I think it doesn't add too many decisions to Warlock's play, and so I'm going to rate it A tier. I think that this is definitely on the high end of A tier in terms of fun, though, because there's a lot of cool things that you can do with Fiend Warlock, and the way that it works with other classes and stuff is always really interesting as well. But mostly what you're doing with this character is getting command on a Warlock, and command isn't that fun a spell, even if it is incredibly powerful. Great Old One Warlock. So Great Old One is all about Mortal Reminder, where on critical hits you spread fear to enemies. It's a passive ability, so it rarely comes up in terms of decision making, and it is probably a little hypocritical of me that I'm going to say I don't care that Great Old One Warlock doesn't get to make decisions. Mortal Reminder is so awesome to use that it doesn't matter. Just fearing every enemy all the time on critical hits is really fun and satisfying. The animation is great. It's just really cool to do. There's lots of cool critical hit builds that you can build around Eldritch Blasts and Mortal Reminder, or around Mortal Reminder attached to other forms of critical hits, and they're all really fun. Spreading fear around big groups of enemies is extremely thematic for a Warlock, and so even though it doesn't add too much strategic decision making to the character, I don't care. I think that Mortal Reminder is just so much fun to use. I'm going to say that Great Old One Warlock, as a result, is an S-tier class in terms of fun for me, because it is just such a satisfying class to play. Yeah, you aren't going to make too many different choices throughout the game. You're pretty much going to be using Eldritch Blast or a weapon attack to try to critically hit and spread fear around a bunch of enemies, but when that works, it feels good, and when it doesn't work, it doesn't feel bad, because it's just attached to critical hits, so it's not something that you expect to work and then feel the sting of failure when it doesn't work. It's just a nice bonus of dopamine that you get a couple times a fight when it goes off and you get to go, haha, I have defeated you with the power of fear. And I think that that is thematic for Warlocks, so it feels good from a theming standpoint. Fun to do, adds an element of like gambling to the game that just feels good when you roll that 20 and you get that fear. It works out really well, and also lets you do a bunch of cool and creative builds centered around Mortal Reminder, so S tier subclass for me. Wizard. So Wizard is, in theory, the most versatile class in the game, which, if you have been paying attention, you'll know appeals to me very much. Wizards get access to the largest spell list in the game, and as long as you can continue to find and scribe scrolls, you can learn all of their spells, giving you access to a ton of different options in a variety of situations, which is, of course, excellent. Baldur's Gate does pull back against Wizards in a couple ways because of some balance decisions or design decisions that they've made that I think sort of eat a lot of the role that Wizards are supposed to fill in the game. One is allowing Wizards to learn spells from scrolls based on their caster level rather than their wizard level, which is probably not how the game is intended to work. I think that is a misinterpretation of the rules. And what that means is that many wizard builds will only use one level of wizard just to get access to all of the wizard spell list while gaining access to everything else from another class. So you're going to play out as a hybrid of a wizard and another class in a lot of circumstances. And the other is allowing anybody to cast from any scroll at any time. They don't have to have any expertise in the spell or know the spell or anything like that. In tabletop D&D, you can only cast spells from a scroll if that scroll is on your spell list. You can cast spells from scrolls at higher levels than you could cast normally, but it has to be a spell that you could learn eventually, and that makes scrolls, I think, more balanced. Scrolls in Baldur's Gate are kind of imbalanced, but also avoids eating the wizard's role as the person who knows all the spells in a way that Baldur's Gate really does. When anyone can cast any spell at any time, wizard's niche gets kind of compressed down to only the things that specific wizard subclasses do, rather than getting to be the person who has all the answers at any point in time, because anybody can have all the answers at any point in time. For those two reasons, wizards do get pulled back a little bit in Baldur's Gate 3 compared to tabletop, in my opinion, because there's just less reason to take a wizard, because they've given a lot of wizards cool stuff to other classes, or even just to everybody all at once, which makes wizards less unique and interesting as a result. On the other hand, wizards are still really fun. You get to cast a million different spells. You get to go like Pokemon hunting. You get to collect every spell from every scroll, and that in and of itself is very satisfying. Hunting down every spell available in the game is just really satisfying. You get to learn the secret spells and the secret familiar, which feels really good. Those are things that are like really cool moments for your wizard as you're playing through the game, is finding the secret spells and which is sort of the pinnacle of a wizard's career as a spellcaster, is finding a spell that nobody else knows and getting to be the person who knows that spell, that you've sort of rediscovered an ancient spell that nobody else has ever been able to that nobody else knows in the modern era or whatever, is a core power fantasy of wizards, and so I'm glad that they included that in the game for sure. And so there's lots of really fun and cool moments that wizards will give you, and the way that they play, of course, is varied and interesting all the way through, but they are held back a little bit in Baldur's Gate by the fact that anybody can do most of what wizards can do, thanks to anybody being able to cast from scrolls. Overall, though, I think that wizard is just going to be a really fun baseline class. It is squishy but very powerful, and that's appealing because it means that there's risk, but commensurate reward, and characters that have both risk and reward are always going to provide interesting tactical options. Then there's Abjuration Wizard, which has no risk associated with it. Once you reach about level 5 or so with Abjuration Wizard, it's nearly impossible to die on this character because the amount of damage reduction that you get is so absurd by just stacking Arcane Ward, which is much more powerful than its tabletop version. In tabletop, it acts basically as temporary hit points, but in Baldur's Gate, It reduces the damage of every attack and then only by its amount and then only reduces by 1. So it's going to block hundreds or even thousands of damage depending on your resistances and whether you can keep stacking it. And so Abjuration Wizards very quickly become invincible. To me, that is cool. I mean, it's a really cool ability and interesting to experiment with, and also a very good way to play a wizard in honor mode without any of the associated risk. But the associated risk is one of the things that I think makes wizards fun, and so Abjuration Wizard I'm going to rate as a B tier class. Still fun to do wizard stuff with, and I don't think that it's I think it's a balance problem. I think this class is too powerful, but I don't think that it's such a balance problem that it needs a rework or anything like that. I just think that for me it is too safe to be a rewarding play pattern because enemies either won't attack you or won't do any damage. And one of the cool things about playing a wizard is that you get all the power and versatility that provides, but it comes with associated risk. Without any of the risk, a lot of the reward for playing a wizard, the emotional reward for me is gone because I don't feel like I've earned it. Conjuration Wizard. So Conjuration Wizard gets Benign Transposition and a cantrip short rest based Create Water, as well as the ability to not fail when concentrating on conjuration spells as often. Mostly Benign Transposition is just a sick ability. This ability, you can use it frequently. It costs a real resource, but you can refresh it by casting any conjuration spell, so it's a meaningful decision as to when you're going to use it, but you can also use it just to do cool things. And the tactical possibilities of swapping yourself and an ally are significant. There's all kinds of neat stuff that you can do with this, from the sort of level 1 play of just getting yourself out of melee and swapping your barbarian into melee, to a whole bunch of setups that you can do with various hazardous fields. You can lure an enemy near to a cliff by moving your wizard near the cliff and then swapping your pushing character over there so they can push them off the cliff. There's just all kinds of cool stuff that you can do with this ability. I don't think it's that powerful. In fact, I think it's usually not a great use of an action, but to me it's really fun to see these situationally useful abilities shine, and it's something that I think is always going to have a fun and interesting application no matter when you are casting it, and that to me is very satisfying. For that reason, I'm going to rate Conjuration Wizard as an S+ tier character, because I think that the base mechanics of Wizard are already really, really strong, and Conjuration Wizard adds a whole extra layer of Benign Transposition puzzles to a Wizard's arsenal, and I think is, for me, one of the most satisfying wizards to play, because already wizards are very close to S+ tier just at base, because they have so many different decisions that they're making every turn of combat, because you have so many spells available. And Conjuration Wizard gets to add an extra layer of a very unique effect that no other class gets access to, that has enough tactical possibilities that you should always be thinking about it, but isn't so strong that it's going to ruin encounters. And that is the type of thing that I really love playing with and that I want to be experimenting with at all times. Benign Transposition is just such a cool ability that I think Conjuration Wizard is S+ tier. It also comes at level 6, which is a good time for an ability like that to show up, because by that point you're used to the core playstyle of the character. You've figured out like what wizards do and how they play out, because you've had 5 levels to do that, and then you get to add another really cool ability to the character's arsenal and spend your time figuring out how to use that while you're also continuing with the already excellent core play patterns of Wizard. I love Conjuration Wizard and highly recommend it. Divination Wizard. So Divination Wizard is my favorite wizard class, because I think it is very powerful and very functional, but in a pretty satisfying way. Using a portent die is a major investment of a resource, and it has a huge reward. And like other things that you can do off turn, it's just very satisfying to turn an enemy hit into a miss, or to just say you're gonna fail that saving throw. And unlike other things that break bosses' abilities to roll saves and stuff like that, it costs a major resource to use a portent, because you only get a few dice, and so that is pretty awesome as a mechanic, and one that I think is very satisfying to use. For one, you need to have the right portent die available, and two, you need to decide to expend it, and that's really cool. Now, Baldur's Gate does pull back a bit on the impact of using your portent die, just because rests are so easy to come by in Baldur's Gate. So if you're out of portent dice, you can just go long rest again, because there's almost never anything stopping you from long resting in this game. So you'll always have all your resources a lot of the time in play, although if you are short resting less frequently, then you won't. And I think that portent is just such a cool ability that it is really fun to use no matter how you end up employing it. It's always going to feel satisfying and always going to feel interesting. There's all kinds of cool stuff you can do with it. What portent die you have available for that long rest period changes your strategy significantly, whether you're looking to use it to make an enemy fail a save or attack roll, whether you're looking to use it to make an attack hit. If you get a natural 1 or a natural 20, that's on your portent die, that's an exciting moment, and you get to save that die for when it matters most and then use it, and I think that that is really fun. I also really like the prophecies, the expert divination feature that you get at level 6, because they give you a little mini game to fulfill in combat. It's very rewarding to get back a portent die because it's such a valuable resource, and while the mini games I think could be more interesting, like doing damage, doing certain damage types or whatever is not that exciting a condition to fulfill for a major resource. I think they could have gone a little further with the design of those mini games in order to get your portent dice back. It's still just fun, and it gives you an extra tactical layer in combat to try to get the additional portent dice by fulfilling those roles. Like I said, the main downside of Divination Wizard is power level. I think it is maybe just a little bit over curve, but I think that wizards in general are less over curve than sorcerers already, and so Divination Wizard being pretty powerful is not that much of a problem for me. And the fact that you can constantly spam dice while long resting, if you're long resting frequently, is definitely an issue, although for my own play I just don't long rest that frequently, so it doesn't come up, and the emotional impact of spending a portent die is still there. In general, I think that Divination Wizard is always going to be satisfying. You'll always have cool things you can do with the portent. The prophecies give you a neat minigame, and it's an extremely effective class. I mean, we still do want to be playing good characters, so I think I am going to rate Divination Wizard as S+ tier in terms of the amount of fun that it is to play the character. Enchantment Wizard. So Enchantment Wizard gets Hypnotic Gaze, which might as well not exist. It's an action to charm a single creature within 5 feet of you, so you have to get into melee, and then you can incapacitate an enemy for 2 turns. If you run into melee with your Enchantment Wizard, you're putting yourself in too much danger to use this ability, so it's rarely going to see use. And then Instinctive Charm gets you a reaction to charm an enemy that's attacking you, and I find this ability somewhat frustrating to use, because the enemies will often just go ahead and hit one of your allies, which sort of defeats the purpose of the defensive reaction. And there's a bunch of weird bugs where, like, sometimes they'll just stop moving and not do anything if they fail the save. Also, sometimes they'll succeed on the save and just hit you anyways. Also, sometimes they'll fail the save and just hit you anyways because of the game's sort of targeting decision making. And so I find that Enchantment Wizard sometimes is a little frustrating to play because of the bugs. Split enchantment at level 10 is really cool, though, because targeting 2 enemies with enchantments is very satisfying. Maybe a little bit on the strong side, but there hasn't been a lot. Enchantment Wizard hasn't given you massively powerful features up to this point, so it's okay for this one to be pretty strong. And because it's only enchantment spells, there's only so many spells you can cast. Obviously, Otto's Irresistible Dance being doubled does break some encounters, but other than that, there's not that much that the game really suffers from by doubling enchantment spells. I think between the bugs and the fact that double autos does break some encounters, Enchantment Wizard I'm going to place in A tier. I think that it is a fun and satisfying class to play, but doesn't quite do the thing that I want from an Enchantment Wizard in terms of like charming and manipulating enemies, because Hypnotic Gaze doesn't work the way that I would hope it does, that I would hope it would. And the bugs with Instinctive Charm do frustrate me, so I will place it in A tier. But I think that it's still just a super fun character to play, obviously, like every other wizard, and double Otto's Irresistible Dance, while powerful, is also very funny. So definitely worth casting, because if you can make two enemies dance with Otto's, then that is just hilarious and definitely worth doing for sure. Evocation. So Evocation is the damage wizard. It is focused on doing lots of damage, and it does that very well. And it lets you safely drop AoE spells onto your allies without harming them, which is both pretty fun because it gives you a lot of additional tactical options, like using your allies to attract and group up enemies and then dropping a fireball on a big group of enemies, but also because it sort of compensates if you make a mistake in your positioning. Now, for me personally, I don't like that it does that because I want to feel the impact of my mistakes when I make a mistake, but I think that for a lot of players, Evocation Wizard is going to be really fun for that reason because you can still just drop fireballs into melee, and that's just a fun and exciting feeling. So that's definitely something that I want to acknowledge is really exciting to a lot of people. Furthermore, Evocation Wizard just gets to do the things that it's intending to do really well. Potent Cantrip and Empowered Evocation are both numerical bonuses, but you're playing the damage wizard. You want these numerical bonuses because you want to put up big numbers, and if you just want to blow stuff up with your Evocation Wizard has got your back. The tactical options of using your evocation spells on top of allies are all very interesting, and the class features all really support the playstyle that this class is intending to play. So I am going to place it in S tier. I think it does its job incredibly well. Very well designed character. Good job, Evocation Wizard. Illusion. So Illusion Wizards get the ability to cast Minor Illusion as a bonus action, which is kind of cool in combat. Sometimes enemies will attack it. Most of the time they'll just ignore it, although the ability to turn enemy facing in combat does matter sometimes. You can do some cool things with that. And you get the reaction at level 10 to just make an attack miss. Once per short rest. Both of these abilities, I think, are not that exciting to me, but the bonus action Minor Illusion does have some interesting tactical applications. And the reaction to make an attack miss is very satisfying, although the fact that it just instantly turns an attack from a hit to a miss without any questions, I think makes it a little less exciting to use because there's no tension surrounding its use. You know it's going to work, but it is cool because it's a short rest resource, so it's something that you have to actually pay close attention to when you are deciding whether to use it or not and how it is going to actually affect the flow of combat. For most of the game, though, you're just playing a wizard with no abilities that aren't ones that you would get as a standard wizard, but a wizard with no abilities that aren't ones you get as a standard wizard is still just a super fun character to play. You're versatile, you're powerful, the Minor Illusion bonus action gives you a couple interesting combat applications, just some stuff that you might be able to make happen by casting the Minor Illusion, causing enemies to waste an attack against it, because they can attack it. It's not often that they'll choose to, but if you place it correctly, they will, and that can be an interesting tactical puzzle in the first place. And the Illusory Self, because it costs you a short rest resource, does have a bunch of interesting decision trees that come from that, because you have to decide whether that one attack is worth just dodging, or whether it's better to spend a different, just tank the damage, or spend a different reaction against it, like a shield spell, whether that resource will be more valuable, or the Illusory Self will be more valuable. So there's a few additional tactical options that Illusion Wizard gives you, and honestly you don't need that much to make Wizard an S tier class, because already it's one of the most versatile and interesting classes in the game, with a ton of tactical options based on your spell selection and how you've decided to build your wizard. So I'm going to go ahead and rate Illusion Wizard as S tier for fun. Necromancy. So Necromancy Wizard gets basically one ability. Grim Harvest is not a real ability, because it will almost never trigger or be relevant when it does trigger. And resistance to necrotic damage is obviously useful in the late game. You'll certainly never turn down resistance, but it's again not something that you're going to write home about because it's just not that exciting. You're not going to gain a lot of joy from being resistant to necrotic damage. It will just improve the character's combat potential, which is useful from an optimization perspective, but less so from an excitement perspective. However, you get more and better summons, and that is very cool. And I want so badly to love Necromancer Wizard, but the summons, and specifically the undead summons in Baldur's Gate 3, are just so frustrating to use. Having to find bodies for them and then shepherd them through the world, having to like collect bodies and stash them in your camp or in your character's inventories if you can do that in order to have enough fodder to turn into zombies in the late game, when sometimes it can be difficult to find an NPC that you can ambush, is just like a lot of busy work. So if you're resting frequently, then you can pretty quickly have, or your zombies are dying frequently, you can run out of bodies to use for Animate Dead in some segments of the game where there just aren't that many humanoid enemies to turn into zombies or skeletons. And the fact that you have to micro multiple summons around the encounter, and a lot of the time what they spend their turn doing is just missing an attack and then passing the turn, I find not great. I talked about this with Druid, and Necromancer Wizard I think has, with like Spore Druid, and Necromancer Wizard has this problem to an even greater extent, because this is what the entire subclass is built around, is using these summons. And microing the summons around is time consuming. Due to Baldur's Gate 3's lack of an attack preview, it also requires a lot of attention and precision, because if you want your summon to be able to attack, you have to guess where to move it, because the game doesn't tell you whether it's going to be able to attack from that location. And so you can often spend quite a lot of time moving these summons around in combat, which I find tedious, especially because the gain that you get is very powerful. Obviously, moving summons around is very powerful, but not so powerful that I really want to spend 10 minutes per turn optimizing it. And so for me, that's a big drawback in terms of how fun the character is. That said, it does do the thing that it's trying to do really well. You get more summons, you get more powerful summons, and that's really cool. But from a quality of life perspective and sort of how to play the character, I don't think I'm going to rate it very highly. I don't think I will put it down in C tier, because I think that there isn't really a good way to solve that problem other than totally reworking the game from the ground up to have like an attack preview or a grid that you could place your summons on. And obviously that would just be a different game and not worth doing to solve one problem with one class. But in terms of actually playing Necromancer Wizard through the game, I think that it just takes too long for me to enjoy it. So I'm going to rate it as B tier, because it does the thing that it's trying to do, but for me isn't that fun to play. Transmutation Wizard. So Transmutation Wizard gets the additional potions, which is kind of cool. I mean, it's sort of a passive bonus that does require you to build your character in a certain way to take advantage of it. You need to have medicine checks, and it adds a little bit of extra attention to making potions, because you have to make sure that your character who's actually got the Transmutation Wizard feature is the one making the potions, so there's a little bit of an attention tax there. And Transmuter Stone, which provides a bunch of cool benefits. And this feature seems like it's going to be really powerful and really interesting and really cool. And it is one of those things. It's very powerful, but rather than changing your Transmuter Stone to be correct for the appropriate situation, something that would provide a lot of decision making and interest throughout an adventuring day, where you would choose your Transmuter Stone based on the encounter you were going to face, it's pretty much right to just always have it set to Constitution saves, because that's just going to help you maintain concentration on spells. And that, I think, is a little bit of a missed opportunity for the class, because I would rather have to set my Transmuter Stone, which has right in the name that it is a changeable object, to different things in order to fulfill different roles, rather than just have one role be way better than all the others and just correct to keep in my inventory in that way all the time. I think from that perspective, the Transmutation Wizard just kind of didn't work as a design in 5th edition in the first place, because one of those Transmuter Stone abilities is just way better than the others. And so it's pretty much always right just to leave it on con saves forever and forget about it, which isn't what you want from a class ability. You want to be thinking about your class abilities and use them in interesting ways. Finally, at level 10, you get Shape Changer, which in Tabletop lets you polymorph into any animal, but in Baldur's Gate only lets you polymorph into a blue jay, which means that it's basically entirely for flavor. You can use it out of combat to move around. You can use it to get to certain areas that you wouldn't be able to access otherwise without expending a resource, and that is very cool. I mean, at will flying is always interesting, even if it's only out of combat. At will turning into a blue jay is cool and flavorful and fun, but not mechanically that powerful, and I would have liked to see them do a little more with this class feature. I think that there could be interesting ways that you could use it in story events or anything like that, and that would be really nice. I guess it does let you move through the areas that require you to be tiny, and that is kind of cool, but by then you should have those solved by the time you are level 10, so it's not going to add a tremendous amount of utility to your character. For that reason, I think that Transmutation Wizard basically comes down to a character who is a wizard but with proficiency in Constitution saves, and I think that that is just like a slightly safer wizard, so that's still a really fun character to be. A slightly safer wizard is just a great character to be, where you can make all the decisions that wizards normally make, cast any one of a wide variety of available spells to do really cool things, but it doesn't excite me, and so I'm going to place it in A tier because I think it's just a very fun, flavorful, powerful character, but not one that as a subclass brings a lot to the table in terms of enhancing the decisions that you're making or the things that you're doing. It's interesting to me also that wizards ended up sort of all over the map. I've got 2 in the top tier and then 2 in B tier, and so that is kind of cool. I think that that speaks to how impactful wizard subclasses are on how wizard plays out, which is something that I think gets missed sometimes in Baldur's Gate optimization, because wizard is so often taken as just a 1-level dip to enable other builds. But when you're actually building a wizard as a character, you get to see how cool and varied and interesting the subclasses are. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at all of the classes and subclasses in Baldur's Gate 3 and ranking them by how fun I find them. This was really fun to do. I really enjoyed getting to talk about the design of different classes and how they interact, things that I think are exciting about them, and that is always a fun kind of video to make, so I hope that you guys got a lot out of it as well. Something that I think is really cool about this, and that really throws into relief why I love this game so much, is how every single class has at least one subclass in S or S plus tier, because the variety of playstyles in the game is so well supported, even for someone with fairly strong preferences in how they're going to play the game like me. I think that that means they did an excellent job in supporting a wide variety of playstyles, and of course I want to emphasize yet again that this is a very subjective list. This is based on what I enjoy and my preferences, and I'm very open to, if you think that I've missed a fun way to play a character, definitely do let me know, and of course do not in any way let this tier list stop you from playing the game how you enjoy it. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed the video, and of course, as always, if you have, feel free to leave a comment and like the video. Both of those things help me out a ton with the algorithm, and get new people's eyes on these videos, and if you have enjoyed the video as well, you can feel free to subscribe to my channel for more of this and other strategy game content. Cheers, my friends, and I'll catch you next time.